You asked for it, so we're doing it. We're going to be looking at what are the stronger classes, specs to be bringing to the Ny'alotha raid. Now, let's get on the same page with what this is, because some people take this as, if I say one thing is stronger, that means the alternative is absolute trash, dumpster fire. That is not the case. In fact, for most people, if you're not intending to clear the raid within the first 2-3 weeks, heroic, mythic, whatever your difficulty is, then you can pretty much bring whatever you want. In fact, the meta, even in World First Raiding, has shifted over the course of this expansion in a much better direction, that the class you are most comfortable on, and despite what you might think, the balance of a lot of specs is actually really good, is that whatever you're most comfortable on is the better choice. Certainly if it's got higher gear, instead of re-rolling to, say, a Warlock might be more powerful, like we saw at Unat. Yeah, it's undergeared, you haven't played it anywhere near as much, you would have been much better staying on a previous character. Valuable lesson learned by the Method guys during the Crucible of Storms, and you should take that to heart. Who is this intended for? This is intended for those guys who do have a couple of alts that they can step into Ny'alotha with. Which one am I better off going with? Also, for those guys who are intending to clear the raid relatively quickly, therefore they're not going to be kitted out in all the gear the previous bosses drop. If you're looking to progress over the course of a couple of months, likelihood is you're going to have a decent set of gear from all the previous bosses, which throws the class favoritism kind of out of the window. It's nothing you need to worry about, because your character, which might not be favorable, will be way more geared than it would be in an undergeared situation. Therefore, you're better in that scenario, okay? I hope that makes perfect sense for you. That's who that's designed for. So without further ado, let's jump into it. We're going to kick off with the tanks. This video actually took me a couple of days longer than I intended due to browsing discords, checking through logs, and obviously classes and specs that maybe my guild didn't try out, although our tanks especially are really good at cycling through all the classes to see which is going to be most advantageous. Tanks is also an interesting one. This looks like it's going to be the dominance of the Blood DK. Really looking strong this time around. Lots of magical damage in Ny'alotha. The natural comp you're probably going to roll with is something like Blood DK Brewmaster, Blood DK Paladin. Paladins are bringing great utility. Unfortunately, the Warrior and the Vengeance Demon Hunter seeming to be pushed to the side a little bit this time around. Although, I want to point this out. The Vengeance Demon Hunter, especially on the Discords, have discovered some kind of new build which may be promising. Now, as you guys know, I'm a huge fan of the Vengeance Demon Hunter. Absolutely adore that class and spec. I really enjoy tanking on it, and I want to see it come to the limelight. It's not quite been there yet, really, since its inception. People are hoping and praying this is the tier for it. But I could tell you, Blood DKs in particular, for several fights, are looking extraordinarily strong. Not just because of their mitigation and self-healing, but the fact there are loads of fights in there where mass grip is really powerful. Again, maybe the Vengeance Demon Hunter sneaking in under that radar there. What I can tell you is one of the fights, Vexiona, at least on Mythic, does look like it's going to require 3 tanks. In that scenario, you're likely to bring another Blood DK. Why? Lots of magical damage, lots of ads spawning that can be gripped and gathered together, which is super useful for controlling the damage that the boss does to the ads. There's a laser beam that comes out from the major portion of the fight which actually can kill the ads. So having a 3rd tank to control that, with 2 other tanks controlling both of the major ads in that fight, is something you're likely going to want to do unless Blizzard changed it. Remember, this is all based off PTR testing. That is likely to be the way to go. Similar with the Paladins, there's lots of debuffs and things that they can cleanse. So you can bring in Holy Paladins, Rep Paladins, that kind of thing. But Prot Paladins themselves looking relatively strong here. So those are the likely scenarios. If you've got a Blood DK ready to go, it's likely to be hot fire in Ny'alotha. So that's probably what you want to be bringing. The healers. This is a little on the tougher side. Had to talk to a lot of people from a lot of top guilds before talking about the healers. Typically, we've seen the Discipline Priest, Holy Paladin scenario being the standard, the staple throughout all of BFA. That looks like it's probably going to be mixed up a little bit. 2 reasons for that. One, Holy Paladins have been nerfed. They're still very effective. You're just not going to see that like sustained 110k HPS that Holy Paladins with Glimmer are able to put out. Glimmer has been reduced in its effectiveness. Not only that, the major fights here, which are going to be Carapace from N'Zoth, and of course N'Zoth himself, and some other fights, are not really focused on damage that kills the player. They're focused on sanity or mind control in some other way. There are different ways of being killed here, which means that raw healing output and damage prevention aren't really as prevalent, certainly when you get into the deeper bosses here. This opens up the door for the other healers. A big shout here to Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman, especially if you're in a heroic guild, looking like they're going to be very strong. And that reason is the mind control mechanic, which happens on several fights, appears to be breakable on normal and heroic by Tremor Totem. Windrush Totem is also extremely strong with several of the boss fights, which means Shaman overall are looking to get a strong representation in that area. Not only that, they're super good right now, so bringing them in even on the mythic scale is likely to be seen. Will we see Resto Druids? Hard to say right now. There are some fights where they could be effective as sort of like a tertiary healer or a stronger healer, but ultimately if you're doing early progress, which is kind of who this video is designed for, then you're likely still be looking to the healing classes that also do the most damage output while still putting out effective HPS. There maybe are looking for the Holy Priest, but they kind of fall into the Holy Priest, Resto Druid kind of situation. We're likely to still see a Paladin there, still see a Disc Priest in there, probably a Resto Shaman as well. Mistweaver is a big one. We've had several people try and make Mistweaver amazing. They had some changes to hopefully make them more effective. I have to say, I've checked the logs, and also from our personal tests, we're just not seeing it. We're just not seeing the Mistweaver make the dent we want it to make. I hope I'm wrong on this one, but all the data and all the information we have right now does point to the Mistweaver kind of being the lame duck this time around. But it can only take, and I always remind you this, it can only take one patch note coming before Neolotha in order to change that scenario. So always pay attention to that. Don't feel too down about it if you're waiting for the rise of the Mistweaver. I know several people who are also waiting for the rise of the Mistweaver. Just doesn't seem to be happening right now. Let's talk melee DPS. Now, I've seen several tweets and several people being outspoken that Neolotha favors ranged. Wrong. Absolutely dead wrong, in my opinion, and in agreement with many, many top world raiders. This raid actually looks to favor melee. I am absolutely bewildered at people pointing out that this seems like a ranged favored raid. That is not what we're seeing whatsoever in any of the encounters, heroic or mythic. Melee look to be very strong here, and this could be the raid where we see the melee balance go over the ranged balance on certain fights. In fact, looking at Carapace of N'Zoth and the N'Zoth fight itself, they really very much favor melee. Looking really strong this time around is DKs, Demon Hunters, and the Fury Warrior looking exceptional in all fights. There's a likelihood you're going to want to bring 2 Fury Warriors. It looks like we're seeing a repeat that we see in most expansions, is that the last tier warriors just become so goddamn strong once all their gear is lined up and they're just critting all the time and they're just dominating and they're generating so much rage. It seems to be the case this time around as well. There's a huge amount of cleave happening, which, as we know, favors those classes as well. Not only that, they're bringing that utility. If you're not going to be bringing a prot warrior, having the Fury Warrior there bringing in those cries is super useful to the rest of the raid, which gives them that edge. Demon Hunters, of course, with their magic debuff, not only are they super effective, looking to do massive AoE on demand, they're still bringing in a very, very useful debuff to the raid if Vengeance doesn't make its way into the cards. And obviously, with the DKs, more cleave, the better. They can line up really nice. We've seen great results from both Frost and Unholy while we've been doing testing this. Rogues look as strong as ever, but not as effective as maybe someone would like to see. There are certain fights definitely where Rogues are doing exceptionally well. They're not lining up on every fight, from what I'm seeing, like DKs and Demon Hunters and Fury Warriors. But that does not mean they're bad. Again, I reiterate this point. You're likely to have several extra spots for melee. That's likely to be the way it goes. So for enhancement, we've already talked about the ability of Shamans coming into this raid. Certainly if you're in the heroic scenario, maybe we will see, even in Mythic, we're getting those enhancement guys in there. So big shouts to Word Up on that one. Well, we'll talk about casters later. But Rep Paladins, the same. They bring in that utility just like we saw from the Prot Paladins and the Holy Paladins. They're very, very effective this raid. Windwalkers, not seeing anywhere near as many of them, so it's hard to gain actual data on how Windwalkers are performing. But as I said, there's likely to be more melee spots than usual going into this raid. So if you're Windwalker and you've been waiting for your time, maybe now's the time to prove it. I would like to have more data to share with you on Windwalkers, but just not that many people even bothering to test them at this point, considering they're not bringing that much to the raid with always having a Brewmaster there. But this is the raid where maybe we'll see double blood DK, triple blood DK, in which case, if you are a melee DK, if you are a DPS DK, you are rocking Frost, or you are rocking Unholy, be ready, certainly a Vexiona, like we talked about earlier, to have that blood off-spec ready to go. It's likely to be the time that you're going to have to step up, and people will want a DK in that position, and hopefully maybe then the Windwalkers can shine as well. So don't count them out just yet. Look at things like the Queen Ashara fight where people were crapping on Rep Paladins, and we saw that Method did bring in a Rep Paladin in for that fight because their utility is fine. They're absolutely doing their job, and if they're utilized well and played correctly, they can pull off magical things. It's likely to be a really strong tier for melee, so fingers crossed, guys. Maybe the melee will get their time in the sun over their ranged counterparts. Let's finish on our ranged brothers then. As I said, it looks like, certainly towards the latter half of Neolotha, that maybe melee will tip the balance. That does not mean there won't be a strong representation from the ranged, and many raid comps that are going a little slightly later, or even in their main comp if the characters are comfortable with it, bringing range, because they're not doing badly at all. There have been nerfs to Shadow Priest, and some people are predicting the death of Shadow. We're not seeing that. Be fine. You're going to be fine. The reason that both Balanced Druids and Shadow Priests were nerfed coming into Neolotha was exactly why we suspected they were, because there is an enormous amount of multi-target fights. So you might be thinking, Mike, you just said it's going to be a kind of melee strength. Why if there's loads of multi-target and all that kind of stuff, isn't that ranged territory? A lot of the stuff that is multi-target heals after after one of them dies. Certainly if you look at the N'Zoth fight, that's exactly what's happening. So being able to multi-dot an entire room, not that effective realistically. Yeah, you can pad the meters, but that's not going to help you out. Fights like Wrathion actually have explosions which destroy the spires, so multi-dotting them down and AoEing them down, not as effective as you might expect it to be. But what there is still is a huge amount of multi-target fight on most of the fights. Nearly every fight here has multiple targets, but a lot of them can be brought into big cleave range, which generally favors the melee, so it's not that strong. What we will see is a strong representation from mages. Certainly fire mages are just destroying right now. We will see Balanced Druids, we will see Shadow Priests. In fact, Warlocks as well, looking exceptionally strong, seeing a lot of destruction, a lot of affliction. Not much love going out for the Demonology Warlocks right now. Ellie Shaman looking extremely strong. Not only do they have great DPS when they can multi-target, which is nearly every fight, but also they're bringing that Tremor Totem, that Windrush Totem, all those kind of things that people are going to want with these exceptionally large rooms. A lot of movement going on in Neolotha, all strong in their favor. In fact, the great sadness here is the range class I've not mentioned yet, the Hunter. I was torn on the Hunter, as I kind of just take them as a given. It was actually my raid leader who plays a Hunter, Alex from Fatboss TV, who was not able really to justify his own raid spot with what we've seen so far. In fact, even discussed raid leading from a different room in his house over his brother's shoulder because he mains a Hunter and a Shadow Priest. We have lots of both of those already covered as main characters, and Hunter not looking like it's bringing too much to the table DPS-wise or utility-wise. Of all the ranged DPS, that seems to be the weaker side of things. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with them, it's just compared to everything else, they're not bringing anything. So that could be the weak link in the chain this time, is if you are playing Hunter, that maybe, unless your guild is fine. Again, this is for people who might not have the choice and you're going to do progress over time. You're fine. Your Hunter's totally fine. Just out of the ranged camp and the selections you're going to make, Hunter is looking like the weakest right now. In terms of stacking ranged, you're fine with a combination of pretty much everything else. Everything else seems super strong, everything else looks fine, and if you have the spot for it, your Hunter should be fine as well, and if your guild isn't making sort of cutting edge progress, you should be fine on your Hunter as well. I really want to stress that this does not mean every Hunter is being benched. That would be absolute idiocy. That is not what's going to happen. It's just out of the classes, if you're going in slightly undergeared, looking to progress really fast, it is the Hunter out of all of the range that's looking like the weak link right now. So that summarizes everything there. A really strong raid tier. Looking like some really good balance across everything. Healers getting a slightly better representation, although it could be better. Same can be said of the tanks. People probably not surprised to see Blood DK and Brewmaster being mentioned in the same breath. Well, as I said, and probably didn't make a stress enough point of it, we have seen Brewmasters getting absolutely smashed by some of these bosses where Blood DKs were just laughing at them. It could be a case that double Blood DK is going to show up for sub-guilds. Double Blood DK, even triple Blood DK on certain fights, but there's always room for the rest of them. This is looking very balanced. If you are not in the cutting edge tier, you should be fine to play whatever you prefer. You should be absolutely fine, and we'll see a good, healthy balance when it comes to the World First race. I can really see us being represented every single class in the game. I can see that happening every single class, obscure specs, specs that players are more comfortable with across the board. What I do not expect to see, based on what we know right now, and this is all subject to change of course, is every guild using the exact same comp to try and overcome some hurdle. Right now, it looks like you will take whatever your strongest team is, whether that be a gear or whatever people are more comfortable with, and that's what you'll be running with, and they'll be fine. You'll be fine. That is your best odds of clearing this raid quickly. So I hope that puts some of you at ease. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.